I'm Janet Knodel. I'm the Extension Entomologist and Professor for NDSU Extension. And we'll talk about some of the insect pests that are found in dry edible bean fields today. First, we're going to talk about some seedling and root feeders. Wireworm is one of the early season pests that you can find in May and early June. And there's a lot of wireworms in the North America, over 800 different species, but the main ones we have is prairie crane wireworm and sugar beet wireworm. Well, the adult stage is called the click beetle, and it doesn't cause any damage to the crop. However, the wireworm or the larval stage, which is the brown worms you see in the photos, can cause significant damage by tunneling the roots and stems, and that affects the plants when they're very young. They're susceptible, and you can end up with a field that looks spotty like the one in the lower picture. And that's due to wireworm feedings on the roots and stems. And we also have another early insect pest, the seed corn maggot. It's a fly, and the fly is difficult to identify, and it probably just looks like the everyday housefly that you see. But any field that has high level of green decaying organic matter is at risk. The females like to lay their eggs in the organic matter in wet fields. And then they'll feed on the seed that is developing or the seedling. And again, they can cause stand loss. And the maggots, as you can see in the pictures, are headless and legless, and they have a black mandible that's at the tip of the head there. You can see the black mandible. There isn't really a threshold based on insect counts, but you can know when you have cool, wet conditions that you're at higher risk for infestation from seed corn maggot and also high crop residue. And they often infest the stems, and as you can see, they're in large numbers. The next one that is early in the season, again, you'll find them out May all the way through June, is cutworms. And these moths often migrate up into North Dakota and do not overwinter, but some of the species do, like the dingy cutworm and the army cutworm. They're very large moths. They can have a wingspan of 1.5 inches or more, and generally they're kind of dull colored and dark brown to black with numerous markings on the wings. Larvae are the ones that do the damage, and once that larvae is mature, it can be quite large, up to 2 inches, and they're the ones that do all the injury and cutting on the stems and the roots. They'll also feed below the ground as well as above the ground. And they typically will feed at night, so they're a difficult insect to scout for. You go out during the day and you'll have problems finding them, so you really need to get down and bring a trowel with you and dig around in the soil where you observe some cutting and injury. This particular picture was both seed corn maggot and cutworm in the field. And some of the cutworms are called climbing cutworms because they'll actually climb up and cause defoliation as well as cut the plants. So you're going to end up with, again, reduced plant span, and that'll increase your weed problems and then reduce yield. Thresholds in dry beans is 1 or more cutworms per 3 feet of row, and you want to get cutworms under control early when they're small, less than 3/4 of an inch. Another threshold uses the percent of plants that have been cut or damaged by defoliation, and that's 5%. Moving on now to potato leafhopper. This one usually shows up in June. Again, this is one that migrates up from the southern states into North Dakota. So sometimes we'll see it, not till July. Other times we'll see it in earlier in June. They're both kind of green, the adults in the lower part of the picture, and then the nymph is higher. They're both kind of green with white eyes and red shape. Very small, and they're typically found on the underside of the leaf. And one of the characteristics you can use to help identify them is that they move backwards and sideways when they're disturbed. So that's a good characteristic for identification. And again, they're very fast moving and somewhat difficult to count out in the field. So you can also look for some of the symptoms from their injury. They inject a toxin into the plant, and this is known as hopper burn. This is alfalfa leaf, but you can see the hopper burn there in the upper part of the tip of the leaf, and it'll be the same in dry leaves, other crops. The foliage also becomes deformed, wrinkled, and pearl, and worse when we have drought conditions like we've had recently. And another problem with the potato leafhopper with the kerosene sucking mouth parts is that they can vector many different diseases. This is especially a big problem with potato. Threshold and dry beans in the unifoliate stage is 0.5 leafhoppers per plant. Later on, it's one leafhopper per trifoliate leaf. And you can see hot spots with leafhoppers. You can see in this field below that there's a hot spot where plants have all died. Grasshoppers, something we've been seeing quite a bit of when we were in the drought here. Hopefully we're coming out of it, but it's part of the state that's still in a severe drought. So you can see through the IPM crop survey program that we had quite a few grasshoppers in the central part and more western part of the state. There weren't as many in the eastern part of the state. But again, this insect both in the immature stage called nymphs and the adult stage have large mandibles, chewing mouth parts cause foliation and even clip off those dry bean pods. So again, they're going to be worse when it's warm and dry late spring. That promotes a uniform hatching time, so more of them come out all at once and cause problems. Also, the dry weather is good for feeding. They need it fairly warm to get active feeding. And then the hot summer temperatures and adequate rainfall ensures that the crops are growing well and plenty of food for the grasshoppers to eat. And that also decreases the amount of diseases that can infect the grasshoppers and kill them. Late fall, we got a long egg laying period, which we've had the last several years. So there's plenty of time for that female to lay her eggs. And as you can see, there's quite severe defoliation in this bean field. They have a long life cycle, 40 to 60 days, but we only have one generation per year. They start with the egg pods in the soil. They can contain up to 120 eggs and each female will lay 8 to 25 pods. And then once it starts to warm up, the nymphs will hatch, the young grasshoppers, and they go through several instars or growth stages up to 5. And then it'll molt into an adult insect in the late summer. And adults are much more mobile and can move around field to field and find new greener fields once the small grain crops are harvested. Will often move to row crops like dry beans and soybeans. Now the time to scout is once earlier on in June. Look for the nymphs coming out in the quantity. If it's outbreak year, you're better off controlling that high population when they're in the immature stage, the nymph. And then later in August into July, late July, and even into the fall, continue to scout for the adult grasshopper. There's several different ways you can assess grasshoppers. One is a visual, but if you have high populations, it's difficult to count the number of grasshoppers in a square yard. You can also use a sweep metric, which is a little more convenient for sampling for grasshoppers. And then nymphs are typically in ditches and field edges because that's where the eggs are typically laid, and they don't move very far from the eggs once they hatch. So again, look for them early, but as I mentioned earlier, the adults can be anywhere. Because of the wings, the wings can fly long distances and look in the ditches, field edge, and in the field interior. Okay, for thresholds, we can use the sweep net, a 15-inch sweep net, and do 4 180-degree sweeps, and that equals a square yard. So all the thresholds for both nymph and adult are based on number counts per square yard, and we use this threatening as the action threshold. You can buy nets from Great Lakes IPM. If you want to do counts and you don't have a net, and you have too many grasshoppers for a square yard, you can do the number per square foot. Just repeat that 18 times and then divide by 2 for the number per square yard. Okay, then there's a lot of foliage feeding caterpillars. All of these migrate up into North Dakota and do not overwinter here. And the two most common is the thistle caterpillar and the green clover worm. They're pretty easy to distinguish from each other. The thistle's dark, has spines or scoli. And the green clover worm is green with a white line and has the 3 abdominal legs. And here's the adult stage. The thistle caterpillar is the beautiful painted lady butterfly. And then the green clover worm is a moth. And they usually have multiple generations up here once they get up into North Dakota. And they'll go like from the egg to several different instars or growth stages as a larvae. And as that worm matures, it eats a lot more foliage and causes more defoliation. Then it'll go through the pupal stage where it transforms into the beautiful moth. And you can see those mandibles on this caterpillar. They're well developed for chewing through the leaves. For defoliation, again, you need to estimate the defoliation. It's often overestimated. Not as many people do, number of insects per foot row. You could use a drop cloth for it. It's more commonly used down in the south. And for estimating defoliation in dry beans or soybeans, we recommend you walk a W pattern, sample 4 sites and look at 10 plants at each site. Then sample the leaves in the bottom, middle, and top. And then once you have your 10 leaves, remove the highest and lowest, and then do the defoliation estimates on the remaining trifoliate leaf. And then calculate an average among all your leaves that you've collected. So the thresholds that we have established is 30% in the vegetative stage, and as it gets through bloom to early seed, 20%. If they're feeding directly on those pods or the seeds, we need to reduce it down to 10%. And usually 30% is equivalent to 10 to 15 larvae per foot of row. And here is a tool from the Crop Protection Network, and you can use this tool to train your eye because it is difficult to estimate. And they developed this computerized tool. So I guess 25% here. And then it tells you whether you did nice work or you need to go back and refresh your memory on what the defoliation looks like at different levels. It's a really good training tool. So would you spray this field? It's thistle caterpillar. However, if you take a close look, most of you probably would have said yes, seeing all the defoliation in the top of the plant. They're completely no leaves left. However, if you look closely, you don't see any worms or caterpillar. So no, you missed the proper timing, and this is late, too late spray. So early on, you might not recognize green clover worm. When the larvae is real small, the mandibles are not big enough to chew through the leaves. So it looks like a bunch of little speckles, white spots on the leaves. So that is green clover worm feeding. And later on, when the mandibles get bigger, they can chew random irregular holes right through the leaves. Now in 2019, this is very uncommon. We had the green clover worm going directly onto the pods and feeding. We had significant flights coming into North Dakota and Minnesota, and they did a lot of damage feeding directly on the pods. So I do have 3 insects I just want to show you. And these are some new and upcoming insects that we need to watch for in the future. One is being leaf beetle, which is increasing in North Dakota. And you'll probably know this insect if you grow soybeans. It's also a pest of soybeans. And you can identify green or baby beetle by this black triangle spot. And there's no spots. We have 4 spots in black line on the side. There's 2 different colors. You can have red and yellow. They're all the same insect. And then the larvae you won't see unless you dig it in the soil. And it has a brown angle, but it plays and then a brown head capsule. There's 2 generations per year. The first one comes out during the seedling and early vegetative stage. That the first generation emerges as the overwintering adult beetle. And then the second generation occurs late July into August and is more a threat to our pods than pod feeding. So here you can see they have the chewing mouth parts again, and they chew perfect little circular holes between the veins. In fact, you can use that to distinguish which insect causes defoliation. Is it green clover worm, grasshopper, or bee leaf beetle? It's bee leaf beetle with nice circular holes. And the thresholds are, again, the same. As I mentioned earlier, 30% vegetative stages, 20% pod build to healing stage, and then 10% pod damage. And again, the first generation is mainly controlled through our insecticide seed treatments that we use. So you can also sample for baby beetles using the sweet net, and the threshold would be more than 100 beetles selected total number for 50 sweets. And then here's foliation estimate counts. This is the current year, 2024. So you can see it's fairly high over in Minnesota. And most years we have more in North Dakota as well. And the interesting thing is being found out so far out in the western part of the state. This is way out in McLean County. Typically, you see the beetle here along the Dakota and Minnesota border. For most of the beans are grown. Another new one is soybean gall midge. This one has mainly been a pest of soybeans, but recently it was found in dry beans as well. And it has the same characteristics on dry beans as it does soybeans. You can see wilting out. And then if you notice a darkening discoloration and necrotic tissue, almost looks like a disease. But if you take your fingernail, it'll easily scrape away, and you can see the orange colored larvae, or they can be white if they're younger. So that's what you need to do if you do see this in your bean field. And it has spread now in 2024. It's in 7 states and 174 counties. And in North Dakota, it was detected in 2022 in Sargent County. And so this is the area where I think we're most at risk because that seems to be moving slowly northward. It hasn't spread much since we've been in the drought. So it was found in 2022 in Lackahassee County in dry beans. And through greenhouse studies that the University of Minnesota has done, they found that dry bean was less preferred for infestation than soybeans. 8 to 25% in dry beans and 58 to 68 soybeans. So that's good news. So it looks like any area where you're in like a nearby a soybean field and heavily infested with soybean gall midge, your dry bean field may be at risk or infestation. You won't see the adults because they're very small and short-lived. They have two or more generations a year. And then we need to start looking for the Japanese beetle and dried edible beans and soybean fields. Really a large insect, so it's easy to identify, about a ½ inch long, and beautiful coloration, metallic green with coppery brown wing covers. And also you can use these white patches. There's 5 on the side and then 1 on the tail end. And the larvae is kind of large as well when it's mature, 1 inch and C-shaped. And the adult causes defoliation on many of our trees that we grow: oaks, holly, poplar, ash, and then also ornamental plants. They just love roses. And on our crops, it's been a problem in soybean, dry beans, and corn in other states that have higher populations than we do. Now, the larvae is mainly a pest of turf and grass. They have large mandibles, as you can see, that can chew the roots and clip them off, killing the turf. It's especially a notorious pest on golf courses. So here's the trapping that the North Dakota Department of Agriculture does, using pheromone traps for Japanese beetle. And I want you to take a note of how high the population is in the Grand Forks area. This is the big area for dry edible bean production. And they captured total 47,565 Japanese beetles in their traps. They had over 200 traps out in the state this last year. And then the next highest spot is Cass County, is 449. So we haven't really established Japanese beetle being a big pest problem causing defoliation in soybean and dry edible beans yet. Something to watch for with that high of a population. And all the thresholds and insecticides are listed for dry beans in our North Dakota Field Crop Insect Management Guide. So you can access that. I don't expect you to remember all those thresholds. So they're all in the guide, as well as the insecticides that are registered in that crop and for that instead. So I'm signing up for our NDSU Extension Crop and Pest Report, our award-winning newsletter, and you can get updates on whether Japanese beetle have been found in dry beans or soybeans. So there's much more weather, agronomy. So please sign up if you don't have it. There's lots of useful information in there each year. So I do have a fact sheet on the common arthropod pest of dry beans. I only discussed a part of them today, but feel free to access this fact sheet so you know how to identify them.